Prologue. A sea between worlds. Here, in the far northwestern reach of a continent shaped by mountains, forests, and mist, lies a sea unlike any other, a sea born not solely of salt and tide, but of ice, stone, and deep time. Known today as the Salish Sea, it is not one body of water, nor one sprawling bay, but an interconnected network of inland marine channels where ocean meets river, depth meets strait, and ancient rhythms guide every breath of life. It spans the Puget Sound, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and the Strait of Georgia, forming an inland marine world that rivals coral reefs and open oceans in biodiversity, ecological complexity, and evolutionary narrative. Its waters are bordered by evergreen forests, glacially carved islands, estuaries heavy with sediment, and shorelines shaped by millennia of rise and fall. To stand at its edge is to stand at a threshold. You can feel it in the air, even before you see it. The scent of salt and wet stone, the cool breath of water carried inland by wind that has traveled over open Pacific and narrow straits alike, the sound of gulls overhead, and the quieter, subtler sounds beneath them, the steady pulse of waves against shore, the faint click of pebbles being rolled and returned again and again, as if the coastline itself is speaking in a language older than memory. Despite its proximity to modern cities, ferries, ports, and harbors, this sea retains a wild, quiet authority, concealed not by distance, but by familiarity. For those who walk along its shores, it may appear calm, local, and known. Yet beneath its surface lives a hidden empire of species, each adapted to cold water, complex currents, shifting salinity, and seasonal blooms that begin as particles invisible to the naked eye. A casual glance reveals only surface, but the Salish Sea is layered. It is stratified. It is alive in ways that are easy to miss if you only look from above. Beneath the mirrored sheen of a morning inlet lies a world of movement and exchange. Fresh water drifting outward, salt water pushing inward. Microscopic life blooming, fading, blooming again. Predators traveling unseen corridors. Young fish learning the geography of survival. Ancient migratory paths traced through water the way roads are traced through cities. This is not merely water. It is a system, breathing, circulating, exchanging, remembering. And within it, life unfolds with patience measured not in years, but in cycles, migrations, and returning tides. Tonight, and across the pages that follow, we descend slowly into this inland ocean, not to witness spectacle, but to observe, to understand, and to honor the quiet persistence of life that thrives here, out of sight, and often out of mind, because this sea does not announce itself with violence. It reveals itself through attention, and when you listen closely, you begin to realize something important. The Salish Sea is not on the edge of the world. It is a world. Chapter 1. Legacy of Ice, the architect of depth and shape. Nearly 20,000 years ago, long before the earliest human structures rose upon river valleys or shorelines, this region rested beneath the weight of a continental glacier. The Cordilleran ice sheet, at its zenith, extended across the northern reaches of North America, descending southward into what is now the Salish Sea basin. One of its vast lobes, the Puget lobe, crept down the region with relentless, inevitable force. It did not glide gently. It ground, crushed, and carved, reshaping entire landscapes under the pressure of ice thicker than many of today's skyscrapers. Estimates suggest that this lobe reached over 1,000 meters in thickness, heavy enough to deform the Earth's crust beneath it. It is difficult to picture that kind of weight. Not just snow piled high, not just frozen waters stacked like a mountain, but an entire moving continent of ice. Slow, silent, and unstoppable. A pressure so immense it could compress soil into stone, flatten hills, and leave behind grooves and scars still visible in the shape of the land today. As the glacier advanced, it acted like a blade and a bulldozer at once. It scraped away loose material, grinding rock into fine sediment. It pushed entire ridges into new forms. It carved troughs and basins with methodical persistence, the way a river carves a canyon, except colder, heavier, and far more absolute. As temperatures gradually warmed, the ice did not simply melt away. It retreated, stalled, advanced again, and finally receded, leaving behind a maze of deep basins, sills, fjords, and carved valleys. These depressions would become the future channels and basins of the Salish Sea, the underwater architecture upon which all future life depended. In places, the glacier left behind thick blankets of till, a dense mix of clay, sand, gravel, and boulders. In others, it deposited long, streamlined hills called drumlins, shaped like the backs of whales, aligned in the direction the ice once flowed. These landforms still shape drainage patterns, soil types, and shoreline contours across the region. Even the islands tell the story, where glaciers once pressed down with unimaginable weight, inlets, islands, and peninsulas emerged. The San Juan Islands and Gulf Islands did not form by volcanic eruption or sediment deposition. They are the remnants of mountain ridges and highlands left untouched by the deepest scouring. They stand like surviving bones of an older landscape, exposed when the ice withdrew. And when the ice finally loosened its grip, the earth responded. The crust, once pressed downward, began a slow rebound. This isostatic rise continues even now, subtle and patient, lifting some shorelines while other areas continue to settle or erode. Then came the water. With the retreat of the ice and the global rise of sea levels, salt water from the Pacific returned through the newly opened Strait of Juan de Fuca, flooding the basins and channels. Slowly, the remnants of glacial fresh water mixed with incoming marine water, giving rise to the early chemical signature of the Salish Sea. But it was not a single moment of flooding. It was a gradual transformation, a long negotiation between land and sea. Valleys became inlets, lowlands became tidal flats, former glacial lakes connected to marine channels. The sea reached inland, and the land reshaped itself in response. Thus, before salmon, before kelp, before orcas, there was ice. It is the first engineer of this world, and even now, long after the last major ice advance, its blueprint remains. Every deep basin that holds cold, oxygen-poor water, every island chain that breaks wind and wave. The Salish Sea is a living system, but its foundation was built by something ancient, slow, and indifferent. Ice, Chapter 2. The breath of the sea, tides, currents, and circulation. The waters of the Salish Sea are never still. They move in a perpetual cycle, driven by gravity, density, wind, temperature, and salinity. Unlike many enclosed bays, the Salish Sea maintains a dynamic connection to the Pacific Ocean, exchanging vast volumes of water through the Strait of Juan de Fuca. To look at a chart of this region is to see complexity made visible. Channels fold into channels, inlets branch like veins, straits narrow into passages, then open again into broad basins. And through all of it, water moves, not as a single mass, but as layers, pulses, and streams with different temperatures and densities. Here, tides follow a mixed semi-diurnal pattern, producing 2 highs and 2 lows each day, but with uneven heights. These tides, interacting with over 400 islands and countless narrow passages and sills, create eddies, upwellings, and turbulent exchanges that stir nutrients from deep basins to surface waters. In some passages, the tide behaves like a river, surging in one direction with force, then reversing hours later with equal certainty. The water compresses through tight channels, accelerating into visible standing waves and whirlpools. In other areas, movement is subtle, more like a slow turning of the sea's internal gears. This circulation acts as the lungs of the sea, inhaling cold, oxygen-rich marine water from the Pacific and exhaling brackish, nutrient-laden surface water back outward. In deeper basins, some plunging beyond 300 meters, this renewal is vital. Without it, oxygen would dwindle and life at depth would fall silent. But the breathing of this sea is not always equal. In some basins, water renewal can be slow, especially where sills restrict deep inflow. In those places, oxygen levels can drop seasonally, shaping what species can survive there and how deep they can live. The seafloor becomes a boundary not just of depth, but of chemistry, a place where life is constrained by invisible limits. More than 100 rivers drain into this inland sea, including the Fraser, Nooksack, Skagit, Elwha, and Puyallup. Each river brings fresh water, sediment, and nutrients, forming surface layers of lower salinity that float above denser, salt-rich water. This layering is not mere structure. It shapes where species live, how they feed, and where larvae drift. The sea is partitioned by density, not walls. The surface layer often carries the fingerprint of land, fresh water, dissolved organic matter, fine sediments, and the chemical traces of forests, farms, and cities. Beneath it lies colder, saltier water, heavier and older, moving more slowly, often holding nutrients released from decaying life that sank from above. Between these layers, the boundary can be sharp. A thin zone of mixing, a transitional band where the ocean and the continent meet in constant negotiation. Even the wind, particularly during seasonal upwelling, drives nutrient-charged waters upward, supporting plankton blooms that feed the foundations of the food web. Atmospheric conditions, tides, river discharge, and seafloor geometry work together in unseen harmony. In spring and early summer, sunlight strengthens. Days lengthen. Surface waters warm slightly. And when nutrients are available, phytoplankton respond with explosive growth. These blooms can tint the sea green, brown, even milky turquoise depending on species and density. And then quietly the chain begins. Zooplankton rise to feed. Small fish gather, larger fish follow, birds arrive in greater numbers. Marine mammals track the movement of prey through channels they have traveled for generations. To understand life here, one must first understand movement. For in the Salish Sea, water is not habitat, it is motion itself. Chapter 3, where light fades, phytoplankton, eelgrass, and kelp kingdoms. All biological abundance in this inland sea begins with light and microscopic life. Suspended near the sunlit surface are phytoplankton, microscopic algae that, despite their invisibility, produce a significant portion of the oxygen on Earth. Through photosynthesis, they convert carbon dioxide, sunlight, and dissolved nutrients into organic matter. They are not dramatic. They do not roar or leap or breach. They do not have eyes, teeth, or voices, and yet they are the beginning. Phytoplankton drift in the upper waters, carried by currents they cannot control. They multiply when conditions allow, when sunlight is strong enough and nutrients are available. Their lives are brief, often measured in days, but their impact shapes everything above and below them. As light penetrates the upper water column, it forms what scientists call the photic zone, the region where photosynthesis is possible. Here, countless phytoplankton drift, multiply, and are consumed by zooplankton, forming the first link in an intricate food web. But light is not guaranteed. In many parts of the Salish Sea, glacial sediment, river runoff, and stirred-up bottom material can cloud the water, reducing how far sunlight reaches. The photic zone may be shallow in one bay, deeper in another, and this difference determines where plant-like habitats can thrive and where darkness begins. Below and among these drifting cells rise two of the Salish Sea's most iconic plant-like habitats, kelp forests and eelgrass meadows. Kelp forests, the bull kelp and giant kelp, form towering underwater forests, anchored not by roots but by holdfasts that grip rocky substrates. Their long stipes stretch upward toward sunlight, while buoyant gas-filled bulbs hold their blades near the surface. From above, bull kelp can look like scattered floating dots, small surface markers of something much larger below. But underwater, it is an entirely different experience. A vertical world, a living architecture, blades and stipes twisting upward, filtering light into wavering patterns. Within these quiet forests, rockfish, juvenile cod, crabs, and countless invertebrates shelter from predators. Kelp sways, not rigidly but rhythmically, a cathedral of motion where light becomes habitat. And kelp does more than shelter life. It slows currents, traps drifting material, and provides structure in a three-dimensional environment that would otherwise be open and exposed. It becomes a gathering place, a boundary where hunting happens, where hiding works, where young fish learn what it means to survive. When storms arrive, kelp can be torn away. Whole forests can vanish in days. But in calm seasons they return, growing quickly, rebuilding what was lost, as if the sea refuses to remain empty for long. Where kelp thrives, biodiversity rises. Eelgrass meadows. In the quiet shallows where sunlight still reaches sandy or muddy bottom, eelgrass forms dense meadows that serve as nurseries for young salmon, herring, and Pacific sandlance. Eelgrass stabilizes sediment, improves clarity, and offers refuge to species too small to face open waters. Eelgrass is often overlooked because it does not rise dramatically like kelp. It is low, subtle, and close to the bottom, but it forms one of the most important habitats in the entire inland sea. In its blades, young fish find cover. Small crabs hide from birds, snails graze quietly, the sediment settles, the water becomes clearer, the seafloor becomes stable. And in these meadows the earliest chapters of many species are written. Juvenile salmon, newly arrived from rivers, use eelgrass beds as transition zones, places where freshwater fish learn the taste of salt. They feed, grow, and gain strength before moving into deeper waters. Without these nurseries, the journey becomes harsher, the odds narrower. These meadows and forests are the lungs and nurseries of the Salish Sea. They are vulnerable to warming, shading, pollution, and mechanical disturbance, yet remain essential to the very continuity of life here. Because in a sea shaped by motion, structure matters, and in a world defined by cycles, the beginning always matters most. Chapter 4. The Edge of Two Worlds, the Intertidal Realm. Between the highest reach of the tide and the lowest retreat lies the intertidal zone, a world that is neither land nor sea, but both, in alternating rhythm. Life here is defined not only by presence, but by absence, the absence of water, protection and stability for hours each day. To walk here at low tide is to enter a temporary landscape. The sea pulls back, revealing rock shelves, sand flats, eelgrass edges, and tide pools scattered like small windows into the underwater world. Everything is exposed, everything is vulnerable, and yet everything is alive. At the uppermost zone, life endures through heat, dryness, and exposure. Barnacles, periwinkles, and limpets hold fast, sealed against evaporation. Their shells are not just protection from predators, but from the sun itself. Their grip must resist waves, but also resist being pried loose by gulls and crows hunting for an easy meal. Slightly lower mussels form dense beds, creating microhabitats for smaller organisms. Their shells lock together in clusters, trapping moisture and sheltering tiny crabs, worms, and snails in the shadows between them. In tide pools, water trapped by rock depressions forms temporary sanctuaries where sea stars, anemones, small fish, and urchins persist until the sea returns. And tide pools are not calm. Even within a pool only a few feet wide, conditions can change quickly. Sunlight can heat the water, rain can dilute it, evaporation can increase salinity, oxygen can drop overnight. The tide pool is a miniature world of instability, and every organism inside it is built for resilience. The intertidal is a proving ground, a place where adaptation is visible. Organisms here must tolerate variation in temperature, salinity, oxygen, and predators, challenges that define the evolutionary pressures of coastal life. But there is also beauty here that feels almost accidental. A sea anemone opening like a flower underwater. A purple sea star gripping rock with thousands of tube feet. A hermit crab carrying a borrowed shell like armor. A ribbon of green algae shimmering in sunlight. The intertidal is the Salish Sea's shoreline heartbeat, exposed and hidden again, twice a day, every day for thousands of years, and it teaches the first lesson of this sea. Survival here is not about dominance. It is about endurance, because the water always comes back, and everything living here has evolved to wait for it. Chapter 5. The Salmon Narrative. Rivers, Seas, and Cycles of Return. In the cool shadows of mountain-fed streams, in the riffles that shimmer beneath early morning light, a story begins that will stretch across ecosystems, seasons, and continents. Here, beneath gravel beds sifted by countless generations before, salmon emerge as fragile, translucent beings, tiny outlines of life whose future depends entirely on the water surrounding them. Even in these first moments, they carry with them a blueprint millions of years in the making. As juvenile salmon, alevins, absorb their yolk sacs and rise into the current, they encounter a world that both nourishes and challenges. Their bodies, no longer sheltered beneath river stones, must now learn to hold balance within moving water, to sense predators through subtle vibrations, and to orient themselves by instinct toward the pull of downstream flow. This movement is not a choice, but a biological imperative. The rivers guide them toward larger realms where they will mature, feed, and ultimately define the identity of the coast itself. When they reach the estuaries, the places where freshwater and saltwater merge, their bodies undergo one of the most remarkable transitions in the vertebrate world. Specialized cells within their gills, once devoted entirely to conserving precious salts, begin reversing function. Hormonal cascades shift steadily, preparing them for the chemistry of the ocean. This process, called smoltification, is not merely physiological transformation. It is the unlocking of an internal gate, an evolutionary answer to a world of two opposing environments. Smolts gather in these transitional waters, their bodies brightening into a silver sheen. They drift along eelgrass meadows that serve as nurseries, hiding from predators while adjusting to the new salinity. The estuary becomes both shield and gateway, a quiet, shallow realm where the last traces of their river-born identity fade into something new, something pelagic. Soon, they enter the sea. In the expansive waters of the Salish Sea, young salmon encounter an ecosystem abundant with opportunity yet rich in threat. Zooplankton swarms become their sustenance. Schools of herring, when they grow larger, form essential forage. As they feed, their bodies lengthen, their musculature strengthens, and their scales take on the subtle hues of open water. Some salmon will remain within the inland sea for years, following shifting prey distributions around islands, into deep channels, and along kelp-lined coasts. Others will journey outward, guided by ancient patterns, into the Gulf of Alaska, the Bering Sea, and beyond. The scale of their migration defies human intuition, journeys spanning thousands of kilometers, shaped not by maps or intention, but by an internal compass anchored to temperature, magnetism, and inherited memory. In the open ocean, salmon feed with urgency. Their bodies accumulate marine-derived nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, lipids, trace minerals that will one day be carried inland when they return home. They occupy an essential link between distant seas and forest ecosystems, transporting the richness of oceanic productivity into watersheds that would otherwise lack such nourishment. This marine chapter continues for years, often unnoticed by human observers, yet it forms the bulk of the salmon's life. Every choice, every shift in depth, every evasion from a predator's strike, every school joined or left, contributes to the salmon's readiness for the journey back. And then, as if prompted by some unseen signal, the return begins. Adult salmon re-enter the Salish Sea with bodies transformed once more. The biochemical machinery within them shifts direction. They cease feeding entirely and commit the full weight of their stored energy to the task of migration. They follow currents, coastline shapes, and the faintest chemical signatures carried by rivers, recognizing molecular cues unique to their natal streams. Scientists describe this ability as olfactory homing, a phenomenon so precise that salmon can detect differences measured at mere parts per billion. The river they seek is written into the very neurons of their sensory system. As they re-enter freshwater, their bodies undergo another extraordinary reversal. They must now expel excess water rather than conserve it. Their organs, their blood chemistry, even their skin pigments shift with hormonal tides. Their muscles, built for endurance and speed in the open ocean, now power them through narrower corridors, shallower riffles and obstacles shaped by weather and time. In these rivers, predators gather, bears, eagles, otters, and countless scavengers. But the salmon continue, unwavering, guided by purpose that transcends individual survival. Their journey is not for themselves, but for the continuation of their lineage. When they reach the gravel beds where their own lives began, they excavate nests, redds, with sweeping motions of their tails. Here, females deposit eggs and males fertilize them, beginning a new cycle. Their bodies weaken, their vision dims, yet their commitment never falters. After spawning, they die, a conclusion so intimately tied to rebirth that it does not mark an ending but a transformation. Their decaying bodies release a cascade of nutrients stored over years in distant oceans. These nutrients seep into the water, into soils, into roots of riparian forests, into insects that feed birds, into mammals that feed wolves and bears. Scientific studies have shown that even the wood of ancient trees contains chemical traces of salmon, identifiable through nitrogen isotopes. In this way, salmon do more than migrate. They build ecosystems. Their lives are a contract between ocean and land, between past and future. Here, within the Salish Sea, salmon are not simply fish. They are pathways connecting worlds. They are memory encoded in water. They are inheritance carried upstream. Their story continues, one generation replacing another, river to sea, sea to river, in a quiet, eternal loop written into the DNA of the coast itself. Chapter 6. Herring and forage fish, the silver threads of the sea. In the cool, sheltered embayments of the Salish Sea, beneath rippling surface patterns shaped by wind and tide, vast congregations of small silvery fish move like threads of living light. They are forage fish, species whose bodies may be slight, but whose significance is vast. Though often overlooked in favor of larger, more charismatic marine life, these shimmering fish are among the most essential organisms in the entire ecosystem. Of these, Pacific herring carry particular weight. They gather in schools so dense that, from a distance, the water appears to take on a metallic sheen. Each individual moves in near-perfect unison with its neighbors, guided not by a leader, but by instinctive, evolutionary rules, turning, accelerating, and contracting in synchronized waves. Their bodies catch stray shafts of sunlight, each reflection a glint of silver blue that shifts and ripples as though the sea itself were breathing. But their beauty is not merely visual. Herring sit at the heart of the food web, providing nourishment to salmon, cod, seals, sea lions, orcas, seabirds, and countless invertebrates. Without them, the pyramid of marine life that characterizes the Salish Sea would begin to crumble. Every spring, herring embark on a brief but extraordinary event, their spawning. In a ritual as ancient as the coast itself, they approach eelgrass beds, kelp forests, and rocky shorelines by the thousands, sometimes by the millions. Females release adhesive eggs that cling to eelgrass blades, kelp fronds, and stones, forming pale layers of life. Males release milt that clouds the water in a milky haze, turning entire shallow bays into scenes of renewal. For many species, this event is a feast. Seabirds gather in great numbers, diving repeatedly into the shallows. Harbor seals patrol the edges of spawning grounds. Even bears and river otters may take advantage of the abundance where freshwater streams meet marine shorelines. Herring eggs and larvae are rich in lipids and proteins, making them a concentrated source of energy at a vital time of year. The survival of these eggs, however, is precarious. They face predation, storms, tidal scouring, sedimentation, and habitat degradation. Eelgrass, upon which many herring depend for spawning, is itself vulnerable to anchors, warming waters, and pollution. Thus, the health of herring populations reflects the health of nearshore ecosystems. Yet herring are but one voice in this ensemble: Pacific sand lance. If herring are silver ribbons moving through open water, then sand lance are the quiet architects of sandy shorelines. These slender, elongated fish practice an extraordinary strategy. They bury themselves in sand, sometimes for hours or even days, sliding like liquid silver beneath the sediment. This behavior offers protection from predators and extreme temperatures and allows them to conserve energy during periods of low prey availability. Sand lance feed on plankton near the surface, their rapid darting movement making them targets for countless predators. Seabirds such as puffins and mooras rely heavily on them to feed their chicks. Juvenile salmon, likewise, depend heavily on sand lance during their early marine stages. For many species, the availability of sand lance can make the difference between survival and starvation. Their dependence on the right substrate, clean, well-oxygenated sand of specific grain sizes, means that their presence is highly influenced by coastal geology and human shoreline modification. Even subtle changes to beaches can disrupt entire sand lance populations. By burying themselves, they turn the humble sandy beach into an essential ecological refuge, linking land and sea through a life history shaped by tides. Surf smelt. Surf smelt add another layer of complexity to the tapestry of forage species. Unlike many fish that spawn offshore or in estuaries, surf smelt come ashore to spawn directly on sandy and gravel beaches, often during nighttime high tides. Their eggs adhere to the upper intertidal zone, a region many assume to be barren. In reality, these beaches represent a vital nursery habitat whose importance cannot be overstated. Surf smelt eggs must withstand fluctuations of temperature, moisture, and predation. If the substrate becomes compacted, polluted, or armored with artificial structures, the eggs may fail to survive. Because of this sensitivity, surf smelt function as indicators of shoreline health and influence coastal conservation efforts. For native peoples of the region, surf smelt have long held cultural and nutritional value, representing an ancient shoreline connection maintained across generations. The role of forage fish in the Salish Sea food web. Though small in size, the combined biomass of forage fish can exceed that of much larger species. Their role as intermediary consumers, transforming plankton into readily available energy for predators, makes them critical in maintaining the strength and flexibility of the food web. Predators ranging from seabirds to marine mammals rely on these species not occasionally, but continuously. The feeding success of salmon entering the ocean, for example, depends heavily on whether sufficient forage fish are available. Resident orcas, too, may shift distribution based on the availability of forage species that indirectly support their prey. The absence of forage fish ripples outward. The abundance of forage fish ripples inward. They are the sea's quiet stabilizers, a world built on small bodies. To watch a school of forage fish move is to witness the ocean's nervous system express itself, fluid, responsive, and collective. They turn not individually, but as a single organism woven from countless parts, a living fabric shifting shape with perfect coordination. This movement confuses predators, enhances survival, and reveals a truth about life in the sea. Strength is not always found in size, but in togetherness. These species do not dominate through force, but through abundance, resilience, and synchrony. Their vulnerability is matched only by their importance. Theirs is a story of many, not one. If salmon are the narrative thread that connects river to ocean, then forage fish are the silver threads woven between, binding predators and prey, seasons and cycles, the nearshore shallows and the depths of continental shelves. They are the currency of the sea, small bodies that carry immense value, and in their shimmering, shifting presence, the Salish Sea breathes. Chapter 7. The Harbour Porpoise, Quiet Navigation in a World of Sound. In the inland channels of the Salish Sea, where the water darkens with depth and the horizon softens into mist, an unassuming marine mammal rises briefly to breathe. Its appearance is subtle, a small triangular dorsal fin slicing through the surface, before vanishing again almost instantly. There is no flourish, no acrobatic leap, no bow-riding display. This is the harbour porpoise, a creature defined not by spectacle, but by quiet efficiency. Harbour porpoises are among the smallest cetaceans found in these waters. Their bodies are compact, streamlined, and built for conservative energy use. In a sea where larger species often capture the public's imagination, the porpoise survives through a different strategy, remaining unnoticed, avoiding unnecessary risks, and moving with understated purpose. Their presence within the Salish Sea has fluctuated over the decades, influenced by changes in prey availability, noise pollution, and historical hunting pressures. Once considered reduced or even locally absent in some regions, harbour porpoises have shown signs of re-emergence, a hopeful indicator that certain ecological pressures may be easing. Unlike their more flamboyant relatives, the dolphins, harbour porpoises do not approach boats. They do not ride pressure waves or bow wakes. Instead, they tend to avoid vessels, slipping away before engines draw near. Their movements reflect a life strategy shaped by caution and necessity. For a small cetacean with a high metabolic rate, avoiding unnecessary energy expenditure is essential. Their bodies are designed for cool, temperate waters, with a thick layer of blubber insulating them from heat loss. Their coloration, muted shades of grey with darker dorsal surfaces and lighter bellies, helps them blend seamlessly with the ocean, reducing visibility to predators from below and above. But the porpoise's world is understood less through sight and more through sound. Masters of acoustic awareness. Harbour porpoises use a sophisticated form of echolocation, emitting tightly focused, high-frequency clicks above the range of human hearing. These clicks bounce off objects, fish, rocks, conspecifics or obstacles, and return as echoes. Their brains interpret these echoes to form a detailed auditory image of their surroundings. This ability is not merely advantageous, it is essential. In the dim underwater environment of the Salish Sea, light fades quickly, and visibility can be inconsistent. Through echolocation, porpoises navigate with precision even in turbid or low-light conditions. Their echolocation clicks are among the highest frequency signals produced by any cetacean, often exceeding 100 kHz. This means the sounds travel shorter distances but offer exceptional detail, ideal for locating small fish, their primary prey. Studies suggest that harbour porpoises can detect fish only a few centimeters long at considerable distances relative to their size. They may detect the shape, density, and even movement of objects through subtle variations in returning echoes. To the harbour porpoise, the sea is less a visual landscape and more a tapestry of acoustic textures, where each echo represents a piece of environmental truth. Harbor porpoises feed frequently, their diets usually consisting of small schooling fish, cephalopods, and occasionally shrimp or other invertebrates. Because their metabolic demands are high, they must consume a substantial percentage of their body weight daily. Unlike larger whales that can store energy in large fat reserves, harbor porpoises have slimmer margins for fasting. A day without feeding can have significant energetic consequences. They often hunt near the seafloor, where small prey concentrate in pockets of softer sediment or along rocky outcrops. Life in small groups. Harbor porpoises typically travel in small groups, often pairs or trios, though larger aggregations may form seasonally or in areas dense with prey. These groups appear fluid, shifting composition based on feeding opportunities or reproductive cycles. Their social behavior is more reserved compared to dolphins. Porpoises do not form large pods, nor do they exhibit complex social displays. Their communication is thought to be more limited, reflecting a quieter, more solitary existence. Yet this does not diminish their significance. In ecosystems where small prey fish form the backbone of the food web, harbor porpoises occupy an essential mid-level predator role, helping regulate fish populations and acting as indicators of ecological function, vulnerability to sound. Because harbor porpoises rely so heavily on high-frequency hearing, they are particularly vulnerable to anthropogenic noise. Vessel traffic, underwater construction, and certain sonar systems can interfere with their ability to navigate or hunt. Loud or persistent noise can cause stress, displacement from feeding grounds, or changes in diving behavior. In a world increasingly shaped by human presence, their sensitivity becomes both a challenge and a signal, reminding us that the sea is not a silent place and that life beneath the surface depends on acoustic clarity. Their reappearance in areas where they were once scarce suggests that some balance may be returning, but it also underscores the need for continued awareness of how human-made sound influences the oceanic realm. Quiet sentinels. The harbor porpoise is a creature of subtleties, a sentinel that moves quietly through channels and bays, marking the health of an ecosystem without fanfare. It does not leap or breach to command attention. It does not linger at the surface. It lives in the spaces between waves, in the dim, shifting places where sound guides motion and silence offers refuge. If the orca is the voice of power and culture in the Salish Sea, then the harbor porpoise is the whisper, gentle, continuous, and essential. Its presence tells us that even the quietest species shape the identity of these waters. In a world often focused on the spectacular, the harbor porpoise shows that survival can be found in humility, caution, and acoustic mastery. A reminder that the sea holds stories both thunderous and hushed. Chapter 8. Orcas, the sovereigns of the Salish Sea. Everything known, everything historical, everything cultural, everything ecological. Your longest chapter by far. First, the whale that defines a sea. In the cold, layered waters of the Salish Sea, where tidal channels weave complex paths around forested islands and ancient glacial basins, there is one animal whose presence feels less like a sighting and more like an encounter with the sea's own identity: the orca. It is the orca who reveals the difference between a body of water and a living ecosystem. It is the orca who threads together past, present, and future, and it is the orca who shows that the sea is not merely habitat, but a memory-bearing world full of lineage and culture. Second, three cultures, one species, yet not entirely separate. For decades, scientists believed that the three ecotypes, southern residents, bigs, and offshores, lived completely separate lives, never interacting, never interbreeding, never acknowledging one another. Much of that remains true in their modern behavior, but genetics now reveals something deeper, something older. There is evidence of historical interbreeding and mingling. It is rare, it is ancient, but it is real. Genetic work comparing mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA suggests southern residents and Biggs orcas likely diverged 150,000 to 300,000 years ago, not millions. Offshore orcas show genetic signals that overlap with both coastal and transient lineages. Interbreeding events occasionally occurred thousands of years ago, likely when foraging ranges overlapped or populations were smaller. Some contemporary Biggs individuals carry resident-linked haplotypes, suggesting occasional older mixing. In rare modern cases, Biggs and residents have been observed, traveling through the same channel simultaneously, briefly altering course around one another, vocalizing at distances short enough to hear one another, and, on extremely rare occasions, producing ambiguous behavior that may be social investigation. They do not form mixed pods today, but they did, long ago. And the echoes of that interbreeding persist quietly in their genomes. It is a reminder that the boundaries we observe today are not the boundaries that always were. Third, the southern residents. The southern resident killer whales are in many ways the cultural heart of the Salish Sea. Their lives revolve around salmon, a bond forged over thousands of years, shaped by the once massive abundance of Chinook that flowed through these waters in nearly unimaginable numbers. These whales are specialists, not by chance but by generations of learning, refinement, and tradition. Their society is built upon one defining principle, the enduring leadership of mothers. Each pod is organized around matrilines, family lines that remain intact for decades, sometimes centuries. Daughters stay with their mothers for life, forming multi-generational groups of sisters, aunts, grandmothers, and young calves. Sons remain with their mothers as well, often towering over them in adulthood, yet still dependent on the steady, guiding presence of the matriarch. Grandmothers serve as living memory, recalling where salmon once gathered in years of scarcity, knowing the rhythms of tides and seasonal returns. And through all of this, the social bonds remain unbroken. There are few parallels to this structure in the rest of the animal kingdom. It offers stability, the long-term transmission of knowledge, and a collective resilience built upon cooperation rather than competition. Perhaps the most striking expression of their culture lies in their dialects. Each pod carries its own set of vocal signatures, distinct patterns of whistles, clicks, and pulsed calls that function like an identity, a language shaped by learning rather than instinct. J-pod's calls are eloquent and fluid, rising and falling with musical cadence. K-pod tends toward sharper rhythmic sequences. L-pod favors broader, slower frequency patterns that roll through the water with stately depth. Calves learn these sounds the way human children learn speech, through immersion in the voices of their family, through repetition, through belonging. These calls are not genetically coded. They are taught, preserved, and cherished through generations. Their hunting, too, reflects culture rather than simple predation. Southern residents hunt cooperatively, spreading out to locate salmon across wide expanses of water, communicating constantly to share information. When a school is found, they adjust their movements, herding fish toward shallow shelves or swirling eddy zones where escape becomes difficult. Individuals may take turns chasing fish to exhaustion or working together to guide prey toward a waiting group member. And when the meal is secured, the whales share it. Food is not hoarded. It is passed between individuals, from mothers to calves, between siblings, even from distant relatives, reinforcing the bonds of family. This cooperative hunting is learned behavior, an inherited technique refined over centuries. But perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of southern resident society is their emotional intelligence. These whales care for their young communally, with older siblings and aunts stepping forward to babysit or guide calves through dangerous waters. When a pod member is distressed or sick, others slow their travel, offering physical support or accompanying the individual closely, as though providing comfort. Entire pods alter their behavior when one of their own is struggling, and when death occurs, whether sudden or expected, the reaction is profound. Orcas mourn. They pause. They gather. They vocalize in altered patterns, as though expressing sorrow in sound. Their mourning rituals reveal an emotional depth found in only a handful of non-human societies on Earth. The southern residents are not simply animals following instinct. They are a culture, one taught, inherited, and held together by mothers, memory, and the enduring flow of salmon. Fourth, Big's orcas, silent predators with strategic minds. While the southern residents are the vocalists of the inland sea, Big's orcas, once known as transients, are the tacticians. They specialize in hunting marine mammals, harbor seals, sea lions, porpoises, and occasionally small whales. Their world is defined not by sound, but by the absence of it. Because their prey hear extremely well, Big's orcas communicate only sparingly while hunting. They move with a quietness that feels deliberate, almost eerie. slipping through channels with calculated precision, surfacing without flourish, disappearing without warning. Their silence is not merely the lack of noise, it is a carefully honed strategy. A hunt can resemble a coordinated choreography. One whale may approach from the flank, forcing a seal to abandon the safety of the shoreline. Another may drive the chase from behind, pushing the prey into deeper water where escape becomes more difficult. Juveniles observe these maneuvers closely, learning by watching, absorbing technique through repetition. Elders lead with calm authority, drawing upon decades of experience to guide the hunt's final moments. The intelligence of Big's orcas reveals itself not only in their coordinated attacks, but in their ability to adapt. They demonstrate tactical patience, waiting motionless for the perfect moment. They improvise when prey behave unpredictably, altering direction in fractions of seconds. They display situational learning, remembering where prey commonly rest, where haul-outs provide opportunity, and where currents concentrate vulnerable animals. Some hunts even hint at long-term memory, individuals returning to sites where they once succeeded, approaching from angles that previously led to capture. In many ways, Big's orcas are the stealth operatives of the Salish Sea, their mastery of silence as impressive as their mastery of strategy. Fifth, offshore orcas, the unknown civilization. Offshore orcas remain the most enigmatic of all. They live far beyond the continental margin, in the open Pacific, traveling in large, loosely organized groups that can number anywhere from 20 to more than 70 individuals. When they enter the Salish Sea, which they do only occasionally, their presence feels almost mythological, as though a nomadic civilization has emerged briefly from the deep to pass through coastal waters before returning to the vastness beyond. Their diet is unusual among orcas. Offshores feed on sharks and large bony fish, a choice that leaves unmistakable evidence. Their teeth wear down dramatically over time, dulled by constant contact with the abrasive, sandpaper-like skin of sharks. This dietary specialization remains one of the clearest markers separating them from other ecotypes. Their vocalizations are equally distinctive, high-pitched, eerie, and less structured than the calls of residents or bigs. Their communication appears adapted to the wide, open spaces of the pelagic environment, where sound travels differently and where groups remain cohesive over vast distances. Their social structure is suspected to be more fluid than that of the residents or bigs. They appear to travel in large, cosmopolitan groups whose compositions shift gradually over time. Their lives seem shaped by distance, depth, and a world of open horizons, a civilization built for the pelagic realm rather than the narrow channels of inland seas. Everything about offshore orcas reminds us how much of the ocean remains beyond our understanding. Sixth, the dark chapter, capture and trauma. The Salish Sea carries a wound inflicted during one of the most devastating periods in the history of human interaction with marine mammals. In the 1960s and 1970s, the growing marine park industry sought young, trainable orcas for display. The sheltered coves and intricate channels of the Salish Sea became prime sites for capture. One of the darkest events occurred in 1970 in Penn Cove. Helicopters hovered overhead, boats circled, and underwater explosives were used to drive entire families of southern resident orcas into nets. Mothers cried out in desperation. Calves attempted to flee but were ensnared. Panic swept through the water as families were torn apart. Some whales drowned in the chaos. Their bodies were secretly weighted with chains and sunk to hide the losses. Dozens of young whales were removed from their pods and shipped to marine parks across the globe. The southern resident population, built upon unbroken matrilineals passed down for generations, experienced catastrophic cultural fragmentation. Family lines were shattered. Elders were taken or killed. Dialects weakened when key individuals disappeared, and the demographic structure of the pods collapsed in ways still evident today. Among the captured was a young female later known as Tokitai, or Lolita, who was taken from her family and spent more than 50 years in captivity until her death in 2023. Her story became a symbol of both endurance and tragedy, a reminder of what was taken not only from her, but from the pod she was born into. The trauma of those years is still felt. The southern residents have not recovered. Their numbers remain far below historical levels, and the genetic bottleneck created during that era continues to shape their future. This was not merely biological harm. It was cultural harm on a scale rarely inflicted on a non-human society. Seventh, grief and ritual, carrying the dead. Among the many revelations that Orcas have offered us, none has been as striking or as deeply moving as their open expression of grief. When a calf dies, the mother often refuses to let the body sink. She may lift it carefully onto her head, supporting it with the delicacy one might use to balance a fragile object. She may drape it across her rostrum, letting it rest gently as she swims. Sometimes she supports the calf from below, holding it close against her chest and belly, refusing to release it to the darkening water. This act can last for hours, sometimes days, on rare occasions even weeks. In 2018, J35, known as Tahlequah, carried her dead newborn for 17 days, traveling nearly 1,000 miles. The world watched in astonishment and sorrow. But what mattered most was not the length of her vigil, but the response of her family. Relatives slowed their pace so she could keep up. Other individuals took turns helping support the calf when Tahlequah grew fatigued. The pod altered its calls, shifting tonal patterns in ways researchers struggled to interpret. Their traveling routes changed, as though the entire family had entered a ritual state. The message was unmistakable. This was shared grief, a communal acknowledgement of loss. These whales do not experience death as an event to be accepted and forgotten. They respond to it emotionally, collectively, and with striking empathy. Their mourning reveals a truth long suspected but now undeniable. Orcas possess not only intelligence, but emotional depth, a sense of connection that extends beyond the living, reaching into the realm of memory, legacy, and sorrow. Eighth, interbreeding, the hidden truth. Although ecotypes appear separate today, genetics reveals a more complex reality. Historical interbreeding. DNA studies indicate transient and resident lineages share deep common ancestry. Rare interbreeding events occurred thousands of years ago. Offshores share genetic signatures with both groups. Some Biggs individuals carry mitochondrial sequences closer to residents. This suggests occasional mixing under ancient ecological conditions. Modern observations. Modern-day interactions are exceedingly rare but do occur, simultaneous traveling in adjacent channels, a distant acoustic detection between ecotypes, a handful of sightings where groups passed within communication distance, one documented case of a Biggs male escorting a non-pod female. Today, they remain culturally incompatible but not genetically alien. Their divergence is cultural first, biological second. The southern resident population is critically endangered. 1. Prey scarcity. Chinook salmon, their primary food, has declined dramatically. Noise pollution, the disruption of an acoustic world. The ocean is not a silent place. For the orca, sound is the medium through which the world is understood, a sensory landscape more detailed and essential than vision. Through sound, they communicate, navigate, coordinate hunts, and keep families connected across great distances. But in the modern Salish Sea, this acoustic world is clouded. Vessels of many kinds, from the largest ferries and cargo ships to the smallest recreational boats, fill the water with a constant low-frequency rumble. These sounds travel far beneath the surface, spreading through channels and bays, masking the delicate calls and echolocation clicks that orcas rely upon so completely. Even a modest increase in background noise can change everything. Calls must become louder, coordination becomes more difficult, hunting becomes less efficient, and the fine, detailed echoes the whales use to find salmon are blurred by mechanical hum. In busy waterways, an orca may struggle to hear its own family. A mother may lose the acoustic thread that keeps her calf close. A pod searching for dwindling salmon may miss the faint signals that guide them to prey. Noise pollution does not wound the body. It wounds the ability to live. And because orcas inhabit a world where sound is their sight, the quieting of our vessels, even by small degrees, restores to them an entire dimension of their environment, the space to speak, to listen, and to find one another in the vastness of the sea. 3. Toxins. PCBs, PBDs, and other persistent pollutants accumulate in orca blubber. When starvation forces them to metabolize fat, toxins flood their bloodstream. 4. Vessel disturbance. Noise and proximity alter their hunting patterns and resting behavior. 5. Climate change. Warming water affects salmon migration, stream flow, and prey abundance. 10th, how we help them. Real, actionable restoration. To help the orcas of the Salish Sea, we must begin where their lives begin, with the salmon. The great Chinook upon which the southern residents rely so completely has declined not through a single cause, but through decades of habitat loss, river alteration, and human interference. To restore these whales, we must restore the rivers that feed them. Across the Pacific Northwest, many rivers are lined with aging dams, once intended for power, irrigation, or navigation, but now obsolete. Their presence blocks salmon passage, disrupts the movement of gravel and sediment, and transforms once dynamic rivers into slow, warm reservoirs. Removing these outdated structures allows rivers to flow freely again, cooling the water, deepening channels, and creating pathways for salmon to return to spawning grounds that have been cut off for generations. Yet dams are only one part of the challenge. Floodplains, once braided and complex, have been constrained by levees and development. Restoring them, allowing rivers to meander, to spill into side channels, to form deep pools and shaded alcoves, brings back the ecological complexity salmon need at every stage of their life cycle. These floodplains slow water in winter, protect communities from floods, and create the quiet, nutrient-rich nurseries young salmon require. In the lower reaches of these rivers and along the coastlines, estuaries form the most delicate and essential transition zones between freshwater and sea. Many have been drained, filled, or altered, restoring estuaries, removing barriers, reopening tidal flow, re-establishing marshes and eelgrass beds, offers salmon a place to acclimate, to feed, and to build the strength needed for the open ocean. These estuaries are the gateways through which both salmon and orcas pass, and their restoration creates abundance far beyond their borders. High in the watersheds, forests play an equally vital role. Reforesting riparian zones brings shade to streams, cooling waters that have grown too warm for salmon to survive. Fallen logs create pools and refuge. Forest soils filter rainfall, preventing sediment from choking spawning. Beds. The salmon depend on the forest, and the forest depends on the salmon. A relationship that echoes all the way back into the lives of the orcas. Even engineered structures can be transformed. By upgrading fish passages, culverts, channels, and ladders, we turn barriers into bridges, enabling salmon to reclaim ancestral habitat. Every kilometer of river returned to them strengthens the foundation upon which the orcas depend. But helping orcas requires more than feeding them. It requires giving them back the soundscape of the sea. Today, the Salish Sea is filled with the noise of vessels, ferries, recreational boats, commercial shipping. This noise masks the orcas' calls, interferes with their echolocation, and disrupts their ability to find prey. By simply slowing vessels, we can quiet the water dramatically. A reduction in speed, even by a small margin, lowers engine noise, reduces wake, and gives the whales the acoustic space they desperately need. Advances in maritime technology offer new hope as well: quieter propellers, redesigned hulls, and noise reduction systems on the region's largest ships. These innovations create a calmer, more navigable underwater world. Regulating the distance between boats and orcas also matters. When vessels maintain greater separation, the whales can hunt more effectively, rest without disturbance, and travel without being crowded or diverted. In certain key feeding grounds, seasonal closures can provide sanctuaries, quiet pockets of sea where the whales can feed without interference during the most critical times of year. To truly help these whales, we must also confront one of the most insidious threats of all: toxins. For decades, industrial chemicals have accumulated in the tissues of marine life, and because orcas sit at the very top of the food web, these toxins concentrate in their blubber. When food is scarce and the whales burn their fat reserves, these chemicals enter their bloodstream, undermining their immune systems and harming their calves. Reducing this toxic burden requires action at every scale. Modern stormwater systems can filter contaminants before they reach the sea. Banning harmful chemicals prevents new toxins from adding to the burden. Cleaning industrial sediments from the beds of harbors and rivers removes poisons that have lingered for generations. Each action draws the water closer to the purity it once held, a gift not only to the orcas, but to every living thing in the Salish Sea. And finally, there is the simplest, most immediate act of all: giving the whales space. Distance is safety. Distance is respect. Distance is survival. When boats remain far enough away, the whales can breathe, travel, and hunt without interference. Mothers can nurse their calves without disturbance. Entire pods can reunite, coordinate, and communicate without being forced to navigate the noise and presence of humans. These measures, restoring salmon, quieting the water, reducing toxins, and respecting space, are not theoretical. They are practical, achievable, measurable. Each step we take returns a portion of the ancient inheritance the whales once held without question. The orcas of the Salish Sea do not ask for our admiration. They ask for a future, and the path to that future is one we can walk, river by river, shoreline by shoreline, choice by choice. 11th Orcas as Coast Salish relatives. For the Coast Salish peoples, the orca is not merely an inhabitant of the sea. It is a relative, a being woven into the same ancestral tapestry as humans, forests, rivers, and mountains. In their teachings, the orca is understood as far more than muscle and bone, fin and breath. It is an ancestor, a protector, a bearer of wisdom, and a symbol of immense strength. Long before Western science attempted to unravel the mysteries of whale societies, Coast Salish stories spoke of orcas as guardians who escort spirits safely across the water. They describe them guiding salmon homeward, ensuring the cycles of abundance continue. Some stories tell of individuals capable of shifting between human and whale form, crossing the thresholds between worlds, moving effortlessly from village to ocean and back again. In these teachings, orcas hold knowledge, memory, and an enduring sense of familial responsibility. They move through the world with intention, with community, and with a consciousness shaped by connection rather than dominance. This worldview is not metaphorical. It is relational. It recognizes that the beings of the sea possess their own cultures, their own histories, and their own ways of tending to one another. And as modern science advances, it finds itself arriving, slowly, humbly, at conclusions indigenous peoples have held for millennia. Orcas possess remarkable self-awareness. They understand social bonds not as fleeting associations but as lifelong commitments. They share food, they teach their young, they comfort the distressed, and they mourn their dead. They pass knowledge from mother to calf, memory to memory, generation to generation. They live within lineages that extend far beyond the lifespan of any single individual. In this way, the scientific and the traditional converge. Both recognize that orcas are not simply animals in an ecological sense. They are culturally rich, emotionally complex beings. They carry stories of their own, encoded in their dialects, preserved in their matrilines, and expressed in the quiet intelligence of their movements. They are spiritual kin not only because ancestral teachings say so, but because their lives reveal it, moment by moment, across the waters of the Salish Sea. 12th, a future still uncertain, but not lost. The future of the orcas is not yet determined. It hangs delicately in the balance, shaped not only by the forces of nature but by the choices we make as their neighbors, beneficiaries, and stewards. Their story is still being written, carried forward with each rising tide, each returning salmon, each breath that breaks the surface of the sea. Their fate will not be dictated by biology alone. It'll be shaped by whether we choose to restore the ancient pathways of salmon, allowing the great Chinook to return to the rivers that once sustained both whale and forest. It will depend on whether we quiet the ocean, giving orcas back the acoustic world they rely upon so completely, a world where mothers can call to their calves, and families can coordinate hunts without the constant interference of engines and machinery. Their future rests on whether we respect their space, allowing them to travel, feed, and raise their young without intrusion. Whether we commit to cleansing their waters of the toxins that accumulate in their bodies, weakening their young and burdening their blood with the legacy of industrial waste. And perhaps most importantly, their future depends on whether we honor their cultures, whether we recognize that these whales do not navigate the sea as solitary beings but as societies, bound together by ties of heritage, memory, and tradition. Whether we see them not as resources or spectacles or symbols alone, but as living nations whose survival is intertwined with our own. The path ahead is uncertain. Yet it is not beyond repair. The orcas remain, resilient, intelligent, guided by ancient knowledge. If we choose to act with understanding and respect, their story will continue, carried forward by the matriarchs, who lead their families through the shifting light of dawn, through the changing tides, and into the waters where hope still waits.